Sir, are you on the phone with us?
Yes, I'm here, Mr. Rather.
Dan, please, if you would tell us who you are, where you are, and what you see.
My name's Mike. I'm in Euless, Texas. And a little over an hour ago, I heard a loud explosion, and a big piece of what appeared to be metal landed on my property. And it's lying there now, and there's a lot of people here, obviously, out and looking at it. And they believe that it's one of Baba Booey's teeth.
Baba Booey, Baba Booey.
Welcome to Beyond the Boss. I'm Neil Van Hart. In the first installment of our SuperFan series, we profiled Gary Dell'Abate, a name that might not be known to those outside the Howard Stern universe, but you've no doubt heard his nickname.
Those are some bazooms. Like a pow. Booey, big bad boom. Baba Booey. Baba Booey, Baba Booey, Baba Booey, Baba Booey.
Some anonymous dude sent me $50. Probably someone cool like Famous Amos or Baba Booey.
For the last 27 years, Gary has served as executive producer for The Howard Stern Show, arguably one of the most influential entertainment programs in broadcast history. Love him or hate him, and there aren't many people in the middle, Howard Stern's radio show was reality programming long before The Real World or Jersey Shore, and Gary Dell'Abate has played a critical role in its success. And if you've been to a tri-state area Springsteen show in the last 30 years, chances are you've seen Gary there too. In this episode, Gary discusses his difficult childhood, his unique relationship with the king of all media, and his obsession with all things Springsteen. This is Beyond the Boss, SuperFan Series, Episode 1. On The Howard Stern Show, loyal listeners are gleefully aware that mistakes never go unpunished, and that the slightest physical or mental blemish will forever become your identity. Stern relentlessly teases his staff in the spirit of great comedy, and his favorite target is Gary Dell'Abate, better known to the world as Baba Booey.
Part man, part monkey, definitely.
If you've never seen a photograph of Gary and were forced to conjure up a mental image based strictly on show descriptors, one might envision an adult male, roughly 49 years of age, covered in thick fur, with enormous green horse-like teeth protruding from massive simian lips, wearing nothing but a loincloth and a beekeeper's mask, occasionally flying into the studio on a vine, waiting to make an enormous producerial blunder, and thus become fodder for the next hour of brilliant radio gold. The truth is, Gary is none of the above, but he takes the abuse along with the rest of the crew in amazingly good humor. Ever the master ringleader, Stern realized early that exposing vulnerabilities makes the greatest radio. It's authentic, dramatic, and most of all, it's honest.
Gloomy Sunday, with shadows I spend it all. My heart and I have decided to end it all.
Gary is no stranger to vulnerability. Raised in Uniondale, Long Island, he often experienced difficult times as a child.
My dad was an ice cream salesman. He worked for a company called Häagen-Dazs, which we all know now, but at the beginning was sort of a startup company. My dad was out of the house by 5:30 in the morning. I never saw my dad in the morning, and also didn't get home till about 7 o'clock at night. And he also worked on Saturdays, so dinners and Sundays were when I spent most of my time with him. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. At a young age, I realize now, but my mom suffered from manic depression. She suffered from mental illness. She had a couple of nervous breakdowns that she was hospitalized for. So that made for a bit of a chaotic upbringing. As her depression started to build and build, as I got a little bit older, like third grade on, my mom just sort of stopped getting up in the morning for me, and I sort of got myself ready, so I was independent, although I always felt her presence in the house. And then, of course, there would be days where my mom would be up and she'd be sitting at the kitchen table crying in the morning for God knows what reason. When you're that age, whatever's thrown in front of you is what appears to be normal. And you don't figure that out till much later on in life, that your dysfunctional household isn't in fact the way everybody lives.
Best is yet to come, and babe, won't that be fine?
In an unpredictable and chaotic household, young Gary craved order and control. Music provided that much-needed outlet, and thus a lifelong obsession began. Music was also one of the few things that would bring the Dell'Abate family together in unified happiness.
My mother would take like a dozen albums and put them on the turntable, and they would just drop down one at a time, and it would be Billie Holiday's greatest hits, Frank Sinatra's greatest hits, Tony Bennett record, Sarah Vaughan record. If you remember the old turntables, you could stack the records and then one would come down and one would come down, and then at some point you would realize that the record sounded really weird, and that's because my mother had 12 records underneath each other, and they would all be sliding around, so it'd be like, woo, and you realize you had to take some of the records out. My dad was a sucker, just a sucker for those record offers on TV. Best of the big bands, and you get an extra record. So he would get those, and then on Saturday or Sunday, he would sit in front of the record player, which was a huge piece of furniture in our house. He would sit there and play his big band records, and he would tell me what everything was. And so I'm actually fairly knowledgeable of big band music. I can talk to you about Harry James and Charlie Christian and Tommy Dorsey and where Frank Sinatra got his start, because my dad would sit and listen to all these records. Both of my older brothers, Anthony and Stephen, both had a pretty extensive record collection. As a kid, I remember mostly going through their 45s and playing them, and then later on going through their albums and playing them. Everyone in the house was big into music. I could pretty much tell you the track listing on Billie Holiday's greatest hits and Frank Sinatra's greatest hits.
The best music, WABC. Oh, love. Good morning, everybody. This is Ron Lundy.
Probably around second or third or fourth grade, I started to become obsessed with WABC radio. It was the radio station. They played the hits, and we'd go on these family trips in the winter, and my brother would bring this composition notebook, and he would number it from 1 to 100. And starting from like a week before Christmas till New Year's Day, WABC would play the top 100 songs, but they would play them out of order. So we would write them down in the book, and that's when I become a little bit obsessed with lists, which I still am to this day. I will buy almost any book of lists.
From Hollywood, this is Casey Kasem with American Top 40. And now the case of the strange name of the great group with the #1 song in the nation.
From there, I graduated to listening to Casey Kasem on my own, and that, I would say, was something bordering on an obsession. I used to deliver papers on Sunday morning, but I would get the entertainment section the day before, where I would immediately look at the top 20 songs that were out in the United States, and I would look at them like the way a kid might look at baseball scores, or somebody might look at a horse program, and see who was coming up and who was coming down. I would get the albums. I would not only listen to the album, but I would study the liner notes, literally study the liner notes. Sometimes if I liked a song and the lyrics weren't on the sleeve, I'd play the record over and over again and write them down, so I had them in a book.
Although the Piano Man was Long Island's local hero, it was a kid from Jersey that ultimately spoke to Gary's musical sensibilities. While hanging out in the park one afternoon in 1975, Gary heard some friends singing lyrics to a song he'd never heard.
Sprung from cages on Highway 9, chrome wheel, fuel injected and stepping out over the line. Oh.
Well, those sound like pretty cool lyrics. I go, what is that? And they said, well, it's Bruce Springsteen, Born to Run. And I had not heard of him at all. I was completely unaware of him. So I went home and I called WPLJ radio and I requested the song. And 10 minutes later it came on. Well, of course, now that I've worked in radio, I realized that radio stations almost never play your request. It came on 10 minutes later because everyone was requesting it. This is like November of '75. And I heard that song and I liked it. So when I was putting my Christmas list together, I went to the record store and I made a list and I requested 4 albums that year, and Born to Run was one of them. I remember literally wearing it out, listening to the other songs, and on whatever level it sort of spoke to me. And I used to joke around even years later, loved Billy Joel. Billy Joel should have spoken to me more because he was from Long Island. He was writing about our life. But whatever it was in Bruce's songs, it painted a picture for me of something that just sort of grabbed me. It had a genuineness to it that was very believable. And I liked it. It was a little dangerous, it was a little dark, it was a little interesting, and it rocked. It was the first time that music had touched me or moved me in a way. I cared about music before, but I really cared about it then.